Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to everyone that has signed up to receive this interview. I'm here with Nicole Louie, the author of Others Like Me, Stories of Childless Women. She's interviewed 14 women across the entire world, and then the 15th story is, of course, her own. So Nicole, did you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for having me, Billy. So I'm Nicole Louie. I'm from Brazil. I'm based in Ireland. And I'm a writer and translator who has spent over a decade studying childlessness, both by choice and by circumstance, and also by ambivalence, which is more common than we think. And I wrote this book, Authors Like Me, The Lives of Women Without Children.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that. It was a beautiful introduction. So we'll jump straight into it. So you started researching this book in 2010, which was obviously, like 14 years ago now. And then you started actually interviewing the women in 2013. So how has the book grown and developed through all the years of putting it together?
Great. Well, I started in 2010, mostly the bibliographical part. So just really trying to find books to read, books that had been written by women who don't have children. So it was mostly, I started with some classics like Bronte sisters, and then I love poetry, so I read Emily Dickinson and tried to find out if she had poems about the topic, Jane Austen, Louisa May Alcott, and then I started getting a bit closer to our times with Virginia Woolf,
Mm,
Zora Neale Hurston, Octavia E. Butler. So just really looking for clues, I guess, in
mm,
their works of literature. Then became quite obsessed with diaries, read Frida Kahlo's, Virginia Woolf's, Anais Nin's, so many in there. Anais spent almost 40 years of her life writing books, diaries about her life, and Beatrix Potter. And
mm.
then 2 years in, I was really enjoying reading the books, but it was very slow in terms of finding answers, obviously, because there was no agreement between me and all of these women that they would answer all the questions burning in my brain on their pages. So I thought maybe I would just talk to people who are still alive, with whom I can have a full conversation. So from 2012 until 2018, I did the field research, which were 33 interviews with women from 25 countries. And then I asked them all the questions, basically. And then from 2019 to 2023, I was writing the chapters, editing what they had told me, and also writing the chapters about my own life and then putting it all together.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. I think it's so interesting that it's over such a massive span of time as well, because when you talk to authors, you don't always have that where it's usually in the last couple of years that they've just started writing and then it's sort of writing non-stop, whereas yours has sort of come in sections almost. So, you use a questionnaire with these women and you've done quite a few interviews you mentioned with
Mhm.
these women. So has the questionnaire itself developed and changed whilst you've been asking questions?
Yes, very much so. I think the first question there I had was probably developed in a very rush way, like because I there was somebody who was interested in, her name is Lucy, the first woman
Mhm.
interviewed in the book, who became a dear friend.
Mm.
And I was just so happy that there was somebody who wanted to share their story with me, and somebody who I was becoming so close to. um, so I just put some questions together. I think at the time there were 65 questions, but
Mm.
I would only find out or realize a couple of interviews in, maybe even a few interviews in, that when you're talking to someone who you know much less, or a complete stranger, it is very important that the questions are more open. I think in the beginning, the questionnaire was probably leading because I was somebody who had
Mm.
chosen not to have kids. So was Lucy. So I was speaking to her maybe a bit more as a looking for validation for my situation and you know, we are buddies, we chose this, and it was more informal. But then with other women who, especially women who didn't choose, who couldn't have children and who really wish they had,
Mm.
or women who are still in the process of deciding if they wanted to become a mom or not, it was important that the questionnaire was tailored to all the possibilities. And obviously, I didn't know about all of these possibilities when I started. So there was a lot of, I had to study how to do interviews. I would watch videos and read books, you know, just a bit more
Yeah.
careful as well with how I behaved in interviews, how I supported them during the interviews. So not just the questionnaire, but the way I related to the women and the conditions in which the interviews happen also evolved, and I hope for the better over time.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, because I mean, you interviewed like in the book, there's such a vast range of women and their experiences are very diverse, very similar in many ways, but yeah, there's just such differences. And like you mentioned, there are some women that really wanted children and aren't able to have them. So it's really useful to hear that you actually changed your own approach to the interview. So not only just, you know, the questions themselves, but you know how you ask them, for example. Can you give any examples of that, like what, you know, of a question that you asked initially that you maybe adapted or changed at all?
I don't know if it was as specific as the question. I guess it was more, well, it would have been, but I think in the beginning I was somehow thinking that I would only interview women who also had chosen, and then um, maybe framing them under that, putting them under that umbrella without even realizing. And then somebody comes to you with a very different scenario, such as I had breast cancer, and then I couldn't continue
Mm.
my IVF treatment because I had to do chemotherapy. And you go, whoa, I
Hmm.
there that is not my life at all. I never went through an IVF cycle. I never wanted to have a kid. Okay, we need to make room for that. And also, I guess it's not just the question beforehand, but be more present in the interview and allow yourself to develop this skill as an interviewer to
Mm.
react to what you are listening and not hold on so much to the framework that you prepared. Because if
Mm.
somebody's coming to you with something as severe as, you know, like my life could have ended because I had this, because I had cancer, or because I suffered sexual violence. So the person from Zimbabwe mentioned going through a civil war when she was
Mhm.
younger. So those are very different realities. You're not going to treat them all the same way. So you
Mm.
might spend longer in a topic or cut a topic short if you feel like that is hurting someone. Or you
Mm.
might take a break, or you might say, maybe we do this interview a second part another day. Let's give
Yeah.
you a breather, you know. And the other thing is also, the other way is also possible when the interviews are very enjoyable, extremely positive. Women, you know, are flying through their answers. They're confident and they're happy with the path that they have chosen when they're able to choose. And then that interview goes in a very different flow. So I
Hmm.
think understanding flow and becoming a better listener
Mm.
was very important for the success of the interviews.
Yeah, I mean, just adapting as well to the people, like you mentioned, like just adapting to
Mhm.
the words that you're hearing, the stories that these women are saying to you, because like you said, they're not the same. That, you know, their realities are so different from each other's, but also from your own. So yeah, no,
Mm.
that definitely, it seems like that will be quite useful throughout the process. So was there any points whilst you were writing that you ever experienced doubt, like when you were sort of interviewing or when you were actually getting to the nitty-gritty of writing the book itself, between you mentioned between 2019 and 2023, was there ever a moment where you kind of thought, oh, am I doing the right thing? Or
Um, doubt, not really. I don't think I've experienced doubt about the book. What I have experienced were, well, I've experienced many things, but negatively or close to doubt. One was, there was a time when I was having a lot of work permit issues, going through a divorce, moving to different countries, losing the visa I had, which was a family reunion visa, and having to start a work permit visa.
mm,
And that was very. heavy on me, like having to work from a place I didn't know. I had nobody to support me emotionally, having to work 12 hours a day at the time as a translator in a big tech company, and then find the energy to support those stories, to find the best way to tell them, to write the bones of the book, which in a way is my own story. In a way,
Hmm.
this is the thread that takes you from the first to the last page is my own story. So when after I had all of the interviews and I had to start writing my own story in the middle of everything that was happening in my life, a few times I thought, do I have this stamina? Like, will I survive?
Mm.
Even just physically, you know, I was spending so many hours on the computer because I work as a translator. So I'm in dinosaur pose the whole day typing.
Hmm.
You finish the shift and then you maybe have dinner and then you're back to the computer, but your eyes are already tired, your back is sore, you're
Hmm.
mentally exhausted, and then to have to create something that will make space for other stories is it came with a lot of responsibility.
Hmm.
So for a while there, for a couple of years there, I had to find a balance between understanding that it was going to take longer than I wanted, because there is something that happens when you have all of those interviews ready in your computer. There is a part of you that believes that you're almost there, even though you are nowhere near the end of the book. You're thinking, yay, I already got all the stories and they're great and I really want to tell everybody about them and how amazing these women are and how different their lives are. Oh wait, I still have to write 200 pages. So I
Yeah.
then thought, just be a little bit easy on yourself. It's going to take the time it takes, and that's okay. So I think that was one of the not doubt, but negotiating the expectation with
Yeah.
myself. And the second thing that happened much later was when I finished the first draft and I was sharing it with agents first. If you want to be traditionally published, you need to get an agent. And
Mm.
then after that, once I got an agent, the amazing Hannah Schofield, we started pitching to publishers. And there was a period, the entire 2022, which was basically just submission to publishers, where I would get feedback that was very hurtful, that felt hurtful. I'm sure they didn't mean to hurt me, but the way I received it was basically, oh, it would be great if there were only women who chose not to have kids, or it would be great if there were only
Oh.
women who couldn't have kids, or it would be great if you had done this instead. And it was always trying to compartmentalize the book, or get some stories out, not because they were not good, but because they had their own idea of what was important. And then I would
Mm.
have to always come and be, no, the book is about the whole
Yeah.
spectrum. The whole point of the book really is, I'm not interested only in the women who chose. I'm not interested in only the women who couldn't have. I'm not interested only in the women who are ambivalent. I want to hear from them all. So no, thank you. I'm not going to, So for a
Hmm.
while there, I was thinking, will I ever find an editor who gets this book, who gets what I'm trying to do? And when you get so many no's, it got into me. I didn't doubt that I would do it, but I thought, oh wow, that's another mountain to climb. It's
Hmm.
gonna take even longer.
Yeah. I mean, it's inevitable, isn't it, that that sort of thing will get you down regardless of how confident you are in your story. And I'm so glad that you did find a publisher in the end that, allowed you that space to speak about the spectrum, like you mentioned, the spectrum of these women's stories.
Yes.
It's interesting as well that you say about women who, or them wanting to categorize the book because writing these stories and you being so immersed in you know your cause and why you wanted to write the book. It's so interesting, well, not interesting, I suppose, but it's difficult in a way to look at the fact that it is going to have to be published by a corporation, for example, and go down that route, and then all the horrible bits of like how much is it going to cost, and who's going to buy it, and the audience and stuff like that. It can be quite difficult, I would imagine, for you to hear all that feedback and not get disheartened, I suppose, a little bit. But it's brilliant that you have
Yes.
such confidence in the story, and like I said, I'm so glad that you found someone that allowed you that space to do that. It's
Oh
also
yeah.
great that you mentioned it. Leads me on to my next question, actually, about the structure of the book, because you mentioned about writing the bones of the book. Um,
Mm.
and you say obviously it's your story that's weaved in between these women's stories of childlessness. And I was really interested in the structure itself, because in the second part where you are talking about all of the stories of childless women, you stop sorry, after every chapter you then have a section of your own story and what was happening in your life at that point. And then at the end of each of those chapters you would speak about how you met the next woman that you were going to speak about, and I absolutely love that structure. So I'm really interested to hear how you found that, or how you decided to do it like that.
Mm. I think part of finding the right publisher came with having found the right structure and fighting for that structure, or being able to explain to them why it was important for me that it was told their way. And the reason why it was told that way is because eventually I found books that spoke to me and that taught me a lot, and that helped me with my thirst, the curiosity I felt
Mm,
about women who didn't have children. But I always felt like I wanted more of two things in the same book. So if I got a memoir, and I found quite a few, there is the Molly Peacock's ones is amazing. Paradise Piece by Piece, a perfect book. It's
mm,
just that for me, I wanted more stories than just Molly. So it's not there's anything wrong with Molly's book. It's just that I was looking for more than one story. So
mm,
I thought, great, I love the memoir part. I love the fact that somebody can go so deep into their minds about not having kids and share this on the page. So great, I want some memoir in my book. But
mm,
because I want more stories, then I think I'll have to bring a compilation of stories as well, which means I will be dealing with a hybrid model for this book, which is very, very hard to put together.
mm,
And the only way I could, in a way, justify my stubbornness about the structure was, yes, I wanted to ask all the women all the questions and give the reader the option to pick and choose which story made more sense to them, which story they felt more related to, where they learn more things. But I also wanted more space on the page for my own head, because obviously I was interviewing myself
yeah.
too during that whole time. And every time I met someone and spent 4, 5, 6 hours talking to them, I would have new thoughts too. I would question certain things, or I would go, oh, I never thought that this was another way to have a career or spend my days or spend my time. Let me go back to myself and think about this for a minute. So the
Mm,
only place where I could toggle between this is what you, as a woman who is being interviewed, is telling me, and this is what I, Nicole, am thinking, is going from memoir and into the compilation. And there
mm,
is no right or wrong. It would have been fine, I think.
mm,
Either, there are three books in that book in a way. There is my memoir. There
mm,
are the stories that could have been published separately, and there are the chapters in between, which is where I'm trying to tie everything together and say, well, now this is how I feel about that thing that I just learned, or that I just saw, or that I just heard.
mm.
But in a way, that's what I wanted. I wanted both, and that's one of the reasons why it took so long, because you have to put a lot of craft into making that work.
Yeah, I mean, craft is just such the perfect word for it, because it's so beautifully procured, sorry, to like what it was meant to be. Like you mentioned, it was obviously meant to be your story, and you say right at the beginning, a patchwork quilt of, women that are childless and their experiences is meant to be,
Yes.
an accumulation of all of that, and that's exactly what you've done. And I think that's, yeah, it's really, really quite wonderful.
Thank
It's
you.
so amazing as well that you mentioned that you learned so much about yourself, like your interview. I think that's a brilliant phrase that you use, that you're interviewing yourself at the same time. It's interesting that you see it like that, because I don't know, I haven't spoken to too many people that have actually interviewed other people for their book. and yeah, they haven't said a similar thing where, they learn more about themselves. But I suppose it's part of it. It's part of your experience interviewing them as well. Like you can't just detach from it. And I think, yeah, it's nice that you were able to weave that in the book so wonderfully.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad. Yeah, there was when I sat in 2019 in this room to write my chapters, I had this distinct feeling of I'm so lost. I don't know where to start with my chapters
Mm,
because I by then I had lived 35 years and you go, what is important? What matters? What is relevant? Maybe something's important for me, but it doesn't mean it's relevant to the story I'm trying to tell. So sorting that, separating what was a good memory from a bad memory, from a relevant memory, that
mm,
took quite a while. And one of the ways that I found to guide me through that process was pretend that you are the one answering the questionnaire now.
mm,
For the first, if you open the questionnaire, and I actually did that. I did that exercise. I opened the questionnaire at the second big screen I have right here that I'm looking at right now. And I went question by question and thought, what is coming to mind? What are the childhood memories or the teenage memories that are coming to mind that you would be using as answers if somebody else was asking? Then I
yeah.
started putting that on the draft, and then obviously some things stayed and some didn't, but that was the exercise that triggered the entire all the chapters that you will read about my life came from that exercise.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. It's great that you had the self-awareness to be able to do that as well. I think that's really brilliant. Okay, so I noticed a lot of similarities between the women, and one of the most prominent ones for me was that, they wanted to contribute to the world more so than just adding to it by having children. And I thought that was a really interesting, theme within these women's stories. And I just wondered if there was any prominent theme that you found or similarity between the women or yourself that you found whilst interviewing everyone?
That you're exactly right. That's the one that stands out the most
Mm,
to me, and it did at the time. Even just a few interviews in, it became quite clear
mm,
how outward the women were, and I don't mean in terms of being extrovert, personality trait of being, out there. It's more turning themselves to others, whether it's helping within their own family or a community or socially in a broader way. And it didn't have to be anything extraordinary either. It could be that they are mentoring their nieces and nephews. It could
mm,
be that they are, one of them, Bernadette, is, Nanette. Bernadette is pretty busy, that one. Nanette, who is in her 60s, probably now in her 70s, who is a carer in an elderly
mm,
home, even though she's an elderly herself, but she's a nurse and she have always wanted to be a nurse, and at some point she chose to work specifically with elderly people.
mm,
So that's 8 hours of her life every day dedicated to somebody else, and it was a chosen path.
mhm.
There were women who are teachers and choosing every day to be in a classroom, responsible for other people's children. And then there are bigger enterprises like climbing the 14 tallest mountains in the
Oh my
world.
God, yeah. That astonished me when I read that story. I was blown
I
away.
know it is. Yeah. Or
Mm,
studying neuroscience, understanding the brain better and how and wanting to work specifically in radiology and help people in hospitals. So it's like this whole other path, more academic, more scientific. And then there is the Hungarian one, Janka, who basically is a software engineer but wants to develop a model that will help us understand uh, economics.
yes,
So
yeah.
it went everywhere. And what I love about that, again, is a word that I think it's so important for us to use when we think about women who don't have kids, but also women who have kids. I'm sure they have their own spectrum. Is the complexity and the layers that dwells in these stories. you can make a difference within your family, supporting those close to you and being supported as well. Because I think it's important to not place women without children always in a supporting role. Not
Hmm.
just because you don't have a child, that means that your time, your energy, your money is available to everybody else. It can be
Yeah.
too light to yourself, but it was beautiful to see how, in their own way, in the scale that they were comfortable with, they were not completely insular. They were finding a way to to give a hand that
Mm,
made them comfortable and that made them their life also uh, connected to others. So I love that. The second thing that I noticed was just the level of self-awareness that was quite heightened.
mm,
I guess they have, generally speaking, more time and the opportunity to reflect more on their lives.
mm,
But they seem to have us, even the ones who couldn't have children, probably had to reflect a lot on that and think, why it happened, how am I going to go about living this other life that I didn't necessarily want, but this is what, these are my circumstances. I think there's a lot of self-reflection involved in both choosing and in coping with
mm,
not having when you want to and can't. And they were just incredibly developed in terms of the critical thinking. Really, I never had an interview where I felt like, okay, I ran out of things to say, or you were just saying two or
mm,
three words to every
mhm,
question, like this is not going anywhere, or we had to kind of engage in small talk because I couldn't get anything out of that. It was incredibly well thought out
mm.
and developed.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant, like how amazing all of these women are in their own individual ways, and also how confident a lot of them are in their decisions. Because I think you mentioned right at the beginning as well, was just that there were some where you found that certain subject areas were quite difficult to talk about, which is completely understandable, but then there were some women that were just completely enthusiastic because they were completely confident in their choices, which is
Yes.
amazing as well. And it must have been really nice to see and kind of validating potentially in a way for yourself that there are women out there that have lived a completely different experiences, made the same life choices potentially as you in regards to having children or not having children, and then be so happy and content in what they've chosen for their life. And I think was it Kay, who was the Thai woman who worked for the jewelry shop with her parents, am I right in saying that?
Her name is Sharon. Yes,
Oh, Sharon, I'm so
Sharon.
sorry, I've
Yeah.
got the name
No,
mixed
it's
up, I'm
fine.
so
There are many
sorry.
names. It's absolutely fine.
Sorry about that. But yeah, so she was super confident in her choice, I remember, and she knew that children just weren't in her path. And I
Yes.
think that it's nice to hear that, because society does put a lot of that pressure on women specifically. Um,
Yes.
and
And the
also,
compensation as well. Sorry, the
yeah.
compensation as well. Like I think that she felt comfortable to say, I don't like children. I don't know how to interact with
Hmm.
them, which
Yeah.
is another big taboo within the community. That there are people who, like me, chose not to have children but love children and don't mind spending time with them. And there are people who feel differently, either
Hmm.
because they dislike the experience or just because they really don't know what to do, how to interact, how to get something out of the kid or the toddler or the bigger children. So I felt it was wonderful for her to make space for that
Hmm.
aspect, for that emotion, and for that the reality of her personality. That's how she feels. It doesn't make her a bad person. She is aware that she doesn't know how to interact with children, so
Hmm.
interacting with children is uncomfortable and she prefers not to. It's absolutely fine. She's not hurting children, she's not abusing children, she's not hating children. She just doesn't know how to interact with them. And
Yeah.
to be able to say that freely and say, because I know that, I prefer this other thing.
Hmm.
So yeah, she's quite something. I like that a lot, and I love that she didn't feel the need to compensate with everything. I don't have children, so I volunteer. I don't have children, but I love children. I don't have children. She didn't feel like she had to create this instead scenario to make people like her.
Yeah.
But what she said, I also don't think it's a reason to dislike her. She's just
Absolutely not.
telling her truth. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is if it was in any other context with any other subject, you wouldn't necessarily question why someone doesn't like something. You know, if it was a food item, for example, or if it was a particular drink, you wouldn't really delve deep and question why someone doesn't like something, or why doesn't someone feel comfortable in a particular scenario if it's any other way. I
Yes.
feel like with children, because we put them, and having children as well, which you speak about in the end of your book, specifically about, you know, the hierarchy of people, especially in working settings, like professional settings, the hierarchy of people with children versus without, and that kind of dichotomy between, you know, you either are empathetic and you have children and you're able to completely understand and have these opinions that are so validating and important because you have children, and then
Yes.
the other side that, you know, you directly, your opinions and the way that you feel and your level of empathy is directly correspondent to, you know, how many children you have, or if you have any children. And
Mhm.
yeah, it was nice to hear Shireen's story where she kind of just said, you know, I don't like children, and that's absolutely fine. I don't need to like children. Other people like children,
Yes.
you know, and that's
Yes.
completely fine. It's interesting though, because that leads me on to my next question as well. So, was there any is was there any moments where you kind of really didn't understand the women that you were speaking to? Like, you know, without giving specific examples, maybe, but like, was there ever any times where you found it difficult to empathize, or yeah, just understand where they were coming from at all?
No, there was never a time where I found it hard to empathize, but there was definitely a moment or a couple of moments where I just thought, logically, I understand what you're saying from, the concept of what you're explaining, but it's not something that I can feel. And
Mm,
I then obviously just had to decouple those things, because the difference between understanding or accepting something and feeling that thing is something that I also discuss in the book in relation to my best friend and our friendship,
mm,
and her expectation that I would feel the same things as she did, or the fact that we realized together that when she decided to become a mom and I decided not to, there was a part of her that thought, oh, because you can feel the same things as I do now that I'm a mother, we might not be able to understand each other. And then us having to build that bridge together and being, no, we can still talk about things. I don't have to have the same lived experiences as you.
mhm,
And I think part of that exercise for me with my friend came from over and over again sitting across from people who were not me, were not
mhm,
feeling what I was feeling, and still being able to understand we have different realities, we think differently about the world. What is a priority for you might not be for me, but I understand why this is a priority for you, and it's fine, and we can all live here and have our different priorities, and we don't need to convince each other. So yes, there were a couple of moments, but not many, to be honest.
mm,
But there were a couple that, and I'm very grateful for them, to be honest, because I
mm,
think if I'm going to spend, like I have, 14 years of my life writing a book with the expectation to open people's minds about a life without children, I think the very least I can do is to open my own mind about the women I'm interviewing when they have different feelings, different ways of thinking about life than I do. Because if I cannot, with all the curiosity, resilience, passion that I put into this book, if I cannot meet them in the middle, or at least accept and respect that they are different from me, how can I expect somebody
yeah.
else outside of that community? So it was an exercise that I had to do myself. But I was quite grateful with the group of women I met, to be honest, although we are very, very different in most respects.
Yeah.
Um, they are all incredibly easy to talk to and very, very loving and lovable.
Oh, I love that. I mean, yeah, you seem to love the women that you speak about, and I think you told me a while back that some of them are still really good friends that you have
Yes.
now, and obviously Lucy, I think, is still quite a good friend of yours, who was the first woman that you interviewed. Um,
Yeah.
but it's so brilliant that you kind of mentioned the merit of understanding different experiences, but also then the result of that, the behavior as a result of that. And I think right at the end, you know, you mentioned your experience with your friend Gabby.
Mhm.
It was sort of where she was really grateful that you know, when she told you, I think it was when she was having her second child, you kind of asked straight away, like, how are you feeling? Whereas she kind of experienced everyone else going, oh my God, that's so exciting and all that kind of stuff, and
Yes.
automatically assuming that she was happy. Whereas actually you just asked how she was feeling about it rather than just assume she was excited and looking forward to it. And that's a massive benefit of, you know, you having a completely different lived experience to her. And you know, there could have been ways that you could have connected with her on, you know, if you had similar experiences in regards to having children, but there's still massive merit in the fact that you have, yeah, like you mentioned, a different experience, and you can learn so much from that as well.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, so whilst you were on this journey to find, because you mentioned right at the beginning of the book, when you began looking for women that didn't have children and that were writing, you mentioned that you were looking for books specifically about, you know, childless women, which sounded more like non-fiction, and then you found women that didn't have children. For example, you mentioned like Virginia Woolf, Bell Hooks, for example,
Mhm.
who don't have children and have just written. And it's interesting to look at that perspective because you do see, you know, especially from you knowing a lot about this and living the experience and now writing your own book about it, um, about how your experiences are weaved into your work in other ways. So I'm just interested to see if there's anything outside of literature that you look for childlessness perspectives.
Yes, there were quite a few. Within books, there was a lot. There was more academic or in philosophy. There is one of my favorite chapters in the book. It's actually where I talk about some of the women philosophers who I discovered while doing research for the book. So you mentioned bell hooks. There is also Angela Davis and Iris
Mm,
Murdoch, and just how they were able to talk about class and race
mm,
and gender and how things are much more integrated than we like to think. I think especially now we live in a society where because we are trying to label everything and I think it's coming from a good place. We are trying to name things that haven't been named or haven't been acknowledged. But sometimes because we are obsessing a bit too much about labels, I think we're forgetting to think about associations and bridges and how everything is connected. And those women, they did an amazing job in their bodies of work to remind us one thing doesn't need to exclude the other. When I get this right, it doesn't mean you lose that right. You know, just reminding us
mhm,
that the collective is possible when certain groups start rising. It doesn't mean somebody else is going on there. So it was very important for me to look into philosophy, to look into gender studies, to look into change makers activism, and also other media. I spend a lot of time watching movies and documentaries or listening to music by Billie Holiday, Stevie
mm,
Nicks. So I wasn't just looking for the word on the page, but also other ways to express emotions. There is an entire section of my Instagram that was a basically got very obsessed with visual arts and all the women, like Georgia O'Keeffe, Tracy Emin, um, who were expressing their non-motherhood through their art, but also were expressing other parts of their womanhood beyond the possibility of being a mother, which I think was also very important. Not just look at what they didn't have, either by choice or by circumstance, but by looking at the other dimensions of their womanhood and expressing them through their art. So yeah, movies, photography, and paintings and sculptures were also places where I went to. I didn't mention them as much in the book. I did mention
mm,
quite a bit of philosophy and activism because I think it's very important, but I didn't mention the other ones just because it was becoming too much.
mm.
So how am I going to put all these hundreds of names here? And I don't want to do this in a way that it's just telling
Mm,
their name and not saying anything about them, not going further into the thought. Children's literature as well, the fact that there's a whole group of women who have created books for children and how those books can help women develop several skills and understand the world, and that they don't get the credit that I think they should be getting. They don't. Some of them don't have children, and they are still completely able to empathize and write for children, and how beautiful that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, yeah, it just doesn't come down to just that one thing of having children. And it's also the expectation that as soon as you have children, you just gain this empathy straight away and you're completely able to understand. Whereas actually, there are a lot of people that have children that aren't able to empathize. And, though that sort of aspect, I suppose, is slightly overlooked. But it's interesting that you mention in like the intersectionality of it, because I believe Doreen, I don't think she was the last person you spoke to. Maybe she was one of the
Mhm.
last people in the
Was
book.
one of the last, yeah.
Yeah, who was a Ghanaian woman. And she said that as a black woman, she was told that because she's choosing to be childless, she's trying to be white and things like that. Whereas,
Yes.
you know, that wouldn't necessarily be the same experience for a white woman. They wouldn't, they just
Not
wouldn't
at
experience the
all.
same things. And I think also the fact that she was asexual as well, which may contributed to her experience of it. I just think, yeah, it's interesting to understand that there is just such a spectrum. And you mentioned that so often in your book, but there is just such a spectrum of experiences within childlessness. And that's what your book highlights quite a lot. And I think it's really beautiful. I was just wondering as well, so in regards to sort of your story, and not your story, but like the story of everyone, do you believe that our destiny is sort of determined, or do you think that it's more environmental impacts that sort of influence our decisions, specifically in relation to parenthood?
Mhm. I think it's very important for us to separate the biological determinism theory, the belief that human behavior is derives from a physiology component, some part of our bodies.
Mm,
Slightly different when it comes to genes. You may or may not have a gene that will lead to you inheriting a condition or a trait from somebody before you in your family. But when it comes to the fact that women have reproductive organs, for me, there is no destiny involved, but there is the possibility, in some cases, the capacity, because not everybody who has uterus is also able to have a baby. But
mm,
if we were to simplify it and think, well, just because a woman has the capacity, the ability biologically to have a child, does it mean that she's destined to? Absolutely
mhm,
not. I really see it as potential, and I actually get really sad when I think about how hijacked uh, this biological aspect becomes as an agenda, especially
mhm,
religious agenda, where you then start thinking about because everybody did that before me, or you start idealizing that aspect of your life as well. But if women have this power, they are meant to use it. Why wouldn't they use it? And then it can become really a way of controlling us and coercing us towards forgetting that yes, it's beautiful, yes, it's a capacity, yes, it's there, but it doesn't mean it has to be used, and it doesn't
mhm,
mean everybody wants to use it. So when we take a step back and think and separate the capacity from being a destiny, I think that's when all the important questions come to mind. And when you ask the questions, it doesn't necessarily mean you won't say yes in the end. I hope it's clear for the people who read this book that this is not an antinatalist book. This is not a book that is incentivizing people not to have kids. It is a
mhm,
book about ask yourself the question. Don't be afraid of asking the question, do I want to become a mother? The answer doesn't matter to me. There is no right or wrong to me. It is
mm,
allow yourself, recognize that it is something that you can or cannot do,
mhm.
and give yourself the permission to go through that journey of
Yeah.
then when and how many, and also why do I want to become a mom? Are you doing this just to feel like your life has more meaning? Do you feel
Mhm,
like you're incomplete and that child is going to make you complete? Like, what are the perceptions that you have, the expectations you have for that child? Are you having a child for the right reasons? Are you ready to raise another human being?
mhm.
It's very important that we ask ourselves those questions. So no, I think it's not destiny, and I think we absolutely can choose, although I understand that not everybody can choose to biologically be able to, but you can still choose to want or not want a child.
That's a very lovely way of putting it, I think, because it isn't, when we talk about, you mentioned biological determinism, it can be difficult to have that conversation. But it is about choosing whether you do want to or whether you don't want to. I think a lot of the time in your interviews, like the women did mention that it seems unfair to have a child just for the sake of, them looking after you when you're older. That doesn't seem like the right reason to have a child. It could be a reason, but it doesn't seem like the reason that you should, the only reason that you should be having children. But yeah, it is interesting as well because you mentioned right at the beginning that when you were younger, you wanted to find out how these women lived, what did they do with their time, their money, their life basically, because there isn't much information. I suppose now that there probably is a lot more, and obviously your book being included in that, but there is just, you're kind of offering an alternative saying, choose what you want, but this is the life of women that have chosen this particular option and this is why. And I think that's a really nice way of putting it. Yeah, I think it's wonderful.
I appreciate that. And I also hope it serves for those who wanted the experience and couldn't have for biological reasons, mental reasons, financial reasons, whatever the reasons, to also find the stories of other women finding purpose and meaning and joy in their lives without having kids. I hope it also helps those who are childless, not by choice, to see those possibilities and to be able to go into that life.
Which is why going back to, your publishing story is why it's so important to include such a plethora of women's experiences because you are just appealing to so many different women and they can take little bits from each different story depending on what suits them and what they can sort of relate to, which is really,
Yes.
really brilliant.
And what they can market as well, right? I think a big part
Mhm.
of some of the feedback was that if we can make this narrower, we can pack into some way. And then it's just like for those who can't have, for those who can have, and then to have dialogue books come and say, no, we welcome the spectrum. We
Mm,
want to nominate all of those voices. We don't want to separate them. I'm so
mm.
happy that they saw through the book.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I'm glad as well because I loved reading about it. So what is the journey you're hoping to go on now with your book from here?
I just want to really spend as much time as I can telling the stories of the book and awakening the curiosity in other people to also read those stories. So, a lot of community events, a lot of book clubs, and interviews with lovely people like you so that
Mhm.
others can read our stories and be more, you know, have more empathy towards those next time you meet somebody who doesn't have children. I did have empathy if they need empathy, or just not assume that they have a miserable life just because they don't have kids. Uh,
Mhm.
I'm hoping also that men will read the book, who have men who have partners who don't have kids, or who might meet the person in the future, have a sister, or a cousin, a
Mm.
neighbor, somebody at work. I think it can have a huge impact as well in how we are treated by others, not to keep these stories just between us. It doesn't have to be just for us who
Yeah,
don't have children. So community events is the way to go. I think have those conversations and hope that they will keep those who
yeah.
come to those conversations will keep having those conversations at home and elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just goes back to the understanding of different experiences. So even if this is not something you can relate to at all, it's good to hear experiences of other people so that you can then act accordingly if it ever comes up in the future.
That's it.
For
That's it.
example, yeah. So I know that you've got an event coming soon in Chester, is that right?
Yes, the last weekend of September, I want to say 28 to 29 of September. It is a 2 days festival called Childless, Storyhouse Childless, and we all meet to have workshops and talks and just chat with each other. There's an amazing program organized by two wonderful women who put this together every year. And one of the talks will be mine. I'll be talking about the finding purpose outside of motherhood.
Hmm. Amazing. Is there anything else that you're working on at all at the moment?
I'm always working on something, but I am
Sounds like
I'm
it.
I'm currently working on organizing book clubs for others like me. I really want to have dozens, if not hundreds, of book clubs, answer questions, and really get this book out there. But on top of that, I'm doing research for my second book. This is already my third year of research. So it's like a 10, maybe 20% effort now that the book's launched, but it's still something is still being formed. It's probably going to be about female bodies, but
Mm.
the structure is still not clear. It's still all coming. Just reading the books and trying to fill my head with the next thing to talk about. But this
Mm.
is a topic that has been in my mind for a long time. So I'm looking forward to having the time and the energy to put into it.
Amazing. Well, I look forward to reading that as well.
Really.
Brilliant. I love that. Okay, well, yeah, thank you so, so much for this conversation today. I've learned a lot from you. It's been really, really brilliant to hear from you. Is there anything else you wanted to end with? Is there anything else you wanted to say at all?
Well, the book is out in Europe. You can buy if you live in Ireland or in the UK. You will find in the bookstores, your local bookstores. If not, it's available online. If you live in other countries, you can buy it on Blackwell's. They have shipping everywhere, and it's launching in the US and Canada in November with pre-orders already open. So I hope if you like the
Ooh.
conversation, you can get the book. It's available in hardback, and ebook, and an audiobook. The paperback's coming next year. And to you, I just wanted to say thank you for making the space for the lovely questions, and above all, for making space for nonfiction books written by women. I'm such a fan of the genre specifically, and I'm thrilled every time you have a new post and you bring a new book. It's so lovely to have another very passionate woman about women's books there. So well done for the work that you
Thank you so much. I
do.
really
Thank you for
appreciate
making
it.
space.
Thank you. Oh, I love that. I'm glad that you appreciate it because I know it's such a niche subject, but the people that really get it, they get it. And yeah, I love
Yes.
that about what the books I'm reading. So yeah.
And you get it, and here we are.
Yes, exactly. Here we are. Well, yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that signed up for this. I really appreciate all of your support.